It's okay.
Peter, classified psycho, telling the sergeant of an army gets found. Extra day, work stack of papers on the president's desk a foot high. He has to finish them by tonight. This determined NBC News entering Lombok, James of W.T. Fields, who proved that every man's a natural food artist. Spends about 75% of his time on foreign matters and is very involved. And all letters are answered. What? No express message from the Texas White House. The president must be very down. He's maintaining a communication network circling the planet.
Electronic photograph? Like you were saying something before about skipping the camera altogether from the brain to the paper, which is possible. At least electronically.
Yeah, man.
Now, this is an electronic picture. This is taken with no film. And it's taken on tape. Electronic tape. Try to see it better there. If you get real close, nothing. It's disappeared. It's all put on tape, and then I replay it at a later date, and then I do the clicking on the tape machine. And with the new machine we're getting, we'll then push a button, and out will come a huge copy in 6 seconds that'll already be in a reproductive form, which is live. And how the tape reacted like to passing lights, having a memory. You know, where it picks up a bright light, then picks up something else, but still remembers the bright light on the tube. We began to see things a little differently.
Fills you up and makes you most bloated. It's not
what about the study space? What about the study space? Yeah. It's a long conversation, I think, what we're doing today is opening the space for student activities, social studies, but not necessarily silent studies, and not necessarily private studies. So people were exchanging practices and writing and stuff. These are all available for students, and also the public, general public as well. And join and study. And now there's a performance style performance group. The event is about see your 60 and thinking about what it means to be in a public place. example, we're not exposed to. No, I'm trying to think about it way before the upper time.
We thought about using that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel that it's infringement? It's just the one time. I'm mostly curious. It's just one thing.
It is. I think that
but I gotta say, I'm standing more in the ground floor since that change because of the table and the little thing than what it was. Yeah, so the table is doing very probably different things too. But it's not necessarily the same budget. It's not worth it.
I know. I mean,
And also, I think there's no good reason to assume that there's going to be a wide consensus over what's important or not. So, I hope it stays. It's only half a minute, half an hour. Yeah. Thank you. And sorry for bothering you. How decisions about space uses are being made, what who decides what, and what about study space. And basically, just one of the anti-outfit library
Sorry, I harassed you. No, but no, chairs are important. So maybe she just went out of my lap. Chairs are important for. No, we're just for the debate.
Hi.
Good. It had the silly animals. Good. I think there might be
everyone.
Hi.
It's good to see you all. Thank you to CUNY for inviting us to be part of this event. I feel very high up.
Yeah.
I feel like I should do the whole lecture like this. We'll alternate. So, we are here to do an excerpt from a lecture performance. The full performance is about a film that was shot in 1968 at Columbia University. Tonight we're just going to do a kind of 30-minute excerpt of the full hour-and-a-half piece for you. But before we start that, I want to kind of give you a bit of context so that you can understand from the whole piece kind of what we're doing with this piece for you this evening. So, has anyone seen The Fall? Yeah? You were watching some of it here? Or have you seen the whole? Oh, you saw it in high school? Wow. It's like 3.5 hours long, right? Yeah. It's not available for distribution. If you really want to see it after this lecture, find one of us. We have a Dropbox link. So the lecture that we usually do has 6 parts. We usually start here with the relationship between action and image, and you can all see that, right? Okay. If you need to move, feel free to. So we start with the relationship between action and image. And we will start there tonight. We'll then move on to the Columbia occupation and just think a little bit about the historical context, kind of go over that a little. What we're going to focus most of our energy on tonight is a feminist rereading or a feminist critique of this film, The Fall. We'll touch very briefly on the dynamics of race and the relationship to the wider civil rights movement. We won't be looking at the aesthetics of the 1960s. And we won't be looking at the role of violence within the film and within the wider context of the time. But we will end here with a kind of open question about legacy and where we are now. So, if you have notebooks and pens, now's the time to get them out. I'm going to rush through a lot of context really fast, so bear with me. But I want to talk to you tonight about a filmmaker named Peter Whitehead. Now, in 1968, Peter Whitehead came to New York City and he made a film called The Fall. There it is, The Fall. So The Fall began as a fiction film. Peter had written a script about an experimental assassination, and he cast an Italian model named Alberta Taberzi to play his girlfriend. But when he arrived in New York and began filming, events outside took over. And Peter abandoned this fictional script in order to document what was happening on the streets of New York City. So The Fall, in its final form, documents the protest movements for and against the Vietnam War. It documents the radical art being made in the city. And finally, most importantly for us tonight, it documents the SDS. That's the Students for a Democratic Society, in their strike and occupation at Columbia University and the clashes with police that followed. So the SDS were the National Student Group, and they were a leading voice for the New Left in the late 60s. The SDS, along with the SAS, the Student Afro Society, had occupied Columbia University for 2 main reasons. The first was to protest the involvement of the university administration with the military-industrial complex and the Vietnam War. And the second was to protest the racist policies of the university, in particular plans to build a gym in Morningside Park in nearby Harlem. There we go. So, everyone still with me? Got it? Great. I want to use this filmmaker, Peter Whitehead, and this film, The Fall, to talk to you tonight about the relationship between action and image. There it is. So let's start with an image. This is a still from The Fall. And I don't know if you can see here, but this is Peter Whitehead, and this is his camera. And he's filming his reflection in one of the windows. It's the window at Mathematics Building, where the SDS are occupying. And you can see he's actually blocking out with his body the reflection. Here's the tree at Columbia, here's the library. And then where his body is blocking out the light, you can see through the window to the sleeping students on the inside of the building. Now, I chose this as the first image because it's from a pivotal moment in the film. It's the moment when Peter Whitehead crosses over from being an outside observer to an active participant in the events he is documenting. And I love his choice to film himself in the window like this because he's referring playfully, as some of you might have already guessed, to this next slide, from Ziga Vertav's Man with a movie camera. And what's happening here, you can see, Ziga Vertav has superimposed his own image looking through the viewfinder of a camera into the viewfinder of the camera that he's actually holding. What he's doing with this gesture is drawing our attention to the materiality of film and crucially to the filmmaker as an active presence in the making of that film. Now, Sigal Vertov was a revolutionary Soviet filmmaker who was then brutally suppressed under Stalin. And he was a major influence on Whitehead, Godard, and their peers at this time. In fact, just over in Paris, Whitehead, in this year 1968, had formed the Sigal Vertov working group, dedicated to creating films with Brechtian forms and Marxist ideologies. So I want to show you this diagram. We have action on this side. You can think about this as the real or the world. And over here we have image. Now, Whitehead, Godard, and their peers are working within a tradition that places the artist, the filmmaker, as a kind of cipher between these two poles. And here's how it works. The artist creates an image. That goes on to cause real, concrete change in the world, which goes back to inspire the artist to create new images, which go on to create new changes in the world, and so on and so forth. A kind of progressive dialectic back and forth between these two poles, all the way down here, along this axis here, which is time, towards the inevitable consequence of a better world. So this is what we're dealing with here. The creative act as contributing to the advancement of society, so that by the time you get down here, there's actually no separation between art and life. And this is why the artist is so important to this model, and this is the model that Whitehead, Godard, and their peers believe themselves to be working within. All right, so in this next image, you can see it's a continuation of that first slide, and Whitehead, as the window draws up, it wipes out his image and reveals to us the students on the inside of mathematics at Columbia. And so Whitehead here is on a threshold. Now, literally, it's the threshold between the inside and the outside of Columbia University. But metaphorically, it's a threshold between the artist as observer and the artist as an active participant. All right, the next slide is something a little bit different. This was shot by a friend of mine in Istanbul, where I live. It was at Gay Pride 3 years ago. I wasn't with my friend when he shot this video. I'd been separated from him, and I was down a side street where the police were firing tear gas. Just as a little tangent, another friend picked up one of those tear gas canisters, and when we got home, we looked up these markings on the side. Turns out the tear gas that Turkish police fire at protesters is manufactured in Philadelphia. Their non-lethal technologies come in a wide array of beautiful colors. And if you are an international government and you're looking to purchase some, you can call Jim Ovidich on his mobile number right here. So back to that video. When my friend showed me this later when we got home, I was fascinated. Because when I watch it, I see through Whitehead's image back to Vertov's. You see there's a moment coming up here where the jet of water that the police are firing from their water cannon makes contact directly with the lens of the camera phone that my friend is holding right here, you see? So this is action and image, the real and the filmmaker meeting. No longer caught in a reflection, no longer superimposed. It's a direct collision between the two. Now, my friend who shot this is a filmmaker, he's an artist. But at the moment that he shot this video, he's no longer here in the center. He's no longer a cipher between these two poles. The violence of this act threw him out here into the world. So, what about the fall? What actions did these images cause in the world? Well, the effect on the filmmaker was this. After shooting the film, he suffered from a nervous breakdown. The film failed to find distribution because of the violence it depicted, and Whitehead told me, "The violence I was documenting entered me and violated me. I thought, fuck this, I'm getting out of here," and I followed what was in my heart, the falcons. And Peter Whitehead did, with just a few exceptions after making this film, retreat to the highest mountain in Saudi Arabia and breed falcons for the next 20 years. And what about the effects of the film itself? Well, here's how the story goes. 5 years after Whitehead made it, it was screened at the Polytechnic in Athens. Now, this was 1973, and the Junta was in control of Greece. 2 days later, the students watching the film were inspired by the images of Columbia and decided to occupy their own university. Now, 2 days later, this occupation had become a popular uprising. On November 17th, the Junta cracked down, killing at least 24 on the streets of Athens. And this is a famous image of the tank outside the gates of the Polytechnic. Now, despite this suppression, or perhaps because of it, these actions by the students became the catalytic event in the overthrow of the military junta and the restoration of democracy to Greece the following year. And if this story is true, then I love it, because it's the archetypal example of this diagram here. You see, we have an action.
Hi,
At Columbia.
I'm Kelsey, and
Which
this
is
is
recorded
Alberta
in an
Diversi. She was the Italian model that Whitehead hired to play his girlfriend.
She goes,
They later began a real-life love affair on set, so I guess that's where I come in. I was the video designer's girlfriend, so they wrote me in last minute to play the dancing girl in this piece. And when I asked him, well, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing, he said, oh, I don't know, just some 60s dancing. And at our first performance, that's what I did. I danced for an hour while Catherine lectured. It went something like this.
tell me when you're ready.
Is the symbol of their highest ideals, freedom, built with their free
Hi, it's really nice to be here tonight.
exercise
Thank you so much for inviting us to be this lecture.
But if the city
So the whole
seems to
lecture
be falling
performance is
apart, they say it is an illusion.
we're only
It
going
is
to
because the people in it are moving faster
But I
and
can't
faster
really
and
give a
faster
context
and
from the
faster.
start. So you
It
can
is not
understand
because they are
where we're coming from in this excerpt. So
afraid to look at the village.
the argument starts tonight with the relationship between action and image. We're then going to move on
Tempts them to addiction to the present, the instant
consideration
patience to the now, to
we
the
spend
new,
most of our
to
time
the
on
new.
feminist reinterpretation.
They become like young people,
We're
exiled
going to
from
spend a
the
little bit of
past
time
and the
thinking
future.
about race.
They can no longer
and
claim
identity
idealistically
and the
that they do
relationship
not
to
live
civil
in
rights
this
movements.
city, but in
And
an
then we're gonna
imaginary one
skip
which will be
completely
built
over
in the
1960s aesthetics.
So they say that
We're
the
gonna
city
touch
has
briefly
gone
on
mad.
violence, and we will
It is
end with an open
miraculously
question about
building
legacy
itself with
thereof.
machines, computers,
So,
structures which are
I
out
want
of
to talk to you
control,
tonight about a
only
filmmaker called
accidentally
Peter Whitehead.
duplicating improvement.
In 1968, Peter Whitehead came to New York City.
A real
to make a
world
film
must be somewhere else, falling away from
Before
the
began as a
city
fiction
into
film,
themselves.
Peter Whitehead had written a script about political assassination, and he cast an Italian model named Alberta
The
Diversi
people
to
develop
play
an
alongside
insatiable
him in the
hunger
film.
for material
But as he
things,
began shooting, events
desperately
outside
trying
took
to make
over,
everything and
Peter
everyone
abandoned
into
the fictional
objects,
script in order to
fragments of
document what was
protection
happening on the
against the
streets of New
imminent
York
loss
City.
of the world.
So,
Which is
the
now
film
both called as
comprises
sensationalism of the present.
It
Finally, they
documents
insulate
protests
themselves
for and
from the
against
world
Vietnam.
with the media,
It
which
documents
feed
radical
them
art
the
behind the
sensation
city.
of the
And
present,
finally, most important,
which feed them the
tonight,
illusion of
it documents
remaining
the
in
SDAs,
touch with
those
the
are
real
students for
world.
democratic society. When I told Peter Whitehead that we were making this piece, he really wanted to be here. You see, contrary to reputation, he's a total softie. And he's been sending us parcels every day we've performed so far. This is the latest one. We've got esoteric self-published novels called Terrorism Considered as One of the Fine Arts. We've got flyers for his labyrinthine and kind of amazing website. And then finally, my favorite one is this DVD, which on the outside reads, "For Catherine, Peter, kiss, kiss, kiss." And then there's a kind of covered up 50p. And then when you open it up, it says, "Alberta Diversi, the true story, the real story, a family romance, an interview with Catherine Hamilton inside another dimension." So, I would have loved it if he could be here tonight. He's very charismatic. He's a really good public speaker. And I thought he could actually do this role. I thought he could play the lecturer for you. You see, you might have guessed I'm not actually an actor. This is my first time performing since I was in college. When I was in college, I did do a bit of acting, but I kept getting cast as the Virgin Mary, and I thought, well, there's not really much of a future in that. So I kind of changed direction and tried to make performances instead. But Peter is quite old now. He's not very well, and he doesn't travel anymore, even for his own film screenings. But he's been really generous with us as we've been making this piece, and I thought, okay, the least we can do is represent him somehow on stage. Now, my first thought was to represent him with a falcon. You see, he had bred them for 20 years in Saudi Arabia, and he once told me that the myth of Horus the falcon could sum up his entire existence. But I did my research. It turns out that falcons are quite hard to get hold of in New York City. They're also a little bit beyond either our budget or our animal caretaking skills. And so this was the best that we could do. This is your Peter Whitehead representative and falcon avatar for the evening. So I want to show you something. I want to show you a little scene, actually. I'm going to try and act out for you the first time I met Peter Whitehead. So we are in Kettering in the north of England. It's a small town. Peter Whitehead's studio is in a former pole dancing club. There are mirrors on the walls, and there are shelves full of ancient Egyptian paraphernalia and stuffed falcons. Peter sits in this big red throne, and he puts a tiny little chair opposite him for me. Hi, Peter. Hey. I wouldn't actually try and feed him from my hand, that would be weird. So Peter, thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me. It's a real pleasure, I love your work so much. Do you mind if I record this? Okay, super, thank you. So, I wanted to ask you today about your film The Fall. In particular the scene where the cops storm the building. I think the film breaks down at that point and it just becomes still images. Can you tell me about why you chose to do that?
When I first got involved in this piece, I was hoping for a more complex role than just the dancing girl. I thought maybe I could be lecturer, but it was decided that my American accent wasn't authoritative enough, so Catherine kept the role. But I want to share with you something about the genesis of this piece, which she failed to mention. So this piece actually began as an article for Vice magazine. But there were not enough tits and guns. And just to get this out of the way, here are some tits. And here are some guns. That's for you, Vice. So when the article didn't work out, I joined Catherine and we began researching for this. And we want to share with you one part of that research tonight, an interview with a man named Tom Hurwitz.
Thanks, Kelsey. So, we met with a man named Tom Hurwitz while we were making this piece. Tom was actually one of the students in the SDS. He was inside the mathematics building. In fact, he was the man who opened the window for Peter Whitehead in that first slide that I showed you. He was on security detail at the time, and the SDS were not allowing any cameras into mathematics because of a fear of incrimination. But Hurwitz was also a filmmaker, and when he saw Whitehead's camera and eclair, he realized that there was no way this was a news crew, and so he invited him in. Now, remember that I told you the occupation began with the SDS and the SAS. So the occupation began in Hamilton Hall. The SDS and the SAS were both in Hamilton Hall, but within a day they parted company. The SAS remained in Hamilton Hall, the SDS moved to the mathematics building. Now, each of the groups had very different strategies, aims, and tactics. And although both of them were trying to protest the racist policies of the university, in segregating the occupation came to be a reflection of the society that they were trying to protest, rather than a challenge to it. So Whitehead and Hurwitz were white men. They were in mathematics with the SDS. At Hamilton Hall, they remain on the outside. So let's take a look at that.
And black students occupy this building here. This is the Black Fortress of this university. They are fighting against the racist policy of this university.
So Hurwitz says he's in the crowd.
Demonstration as it is
They had by this, yeah, and Matham, because we had the campus by this time. They had guns in there at this time.
He says that Hurwitz says they have guns in there.
These guys brought them in, they were really stupid.
And he says they were really stupid, so let's hold on to that, we're going to talk about it in a bit.
Those guys.
Here's a statement that was released by the students on the inside. I'll read the statement. The black students of Columbia University, joined by a few members of the black community, have been in Hamilton Hall for 56 hours, more than that now. We're here protest the racist policies of this university. Columbia has consistently refused to alter these policies when the community has used normal means of protest to de-escalate the war. We are therefore using this dramatic means of protest to highlight the following four demands. You might appreciate it. Number one, the stopping of the construction of the gym.
So that's the gym that we spoke about at the beginning.
And I still maintain the position that it's built up.
Tilt down, Peter.
Number two, we have established a cafeteria with adequate stores.
So they have a cafeteria with adequate
Didn't
storage.
finish the
In charge of our infirmary.
They have a physician in the infirmary.
Our sanitation teams are maintaining the excellent condition of the building.
And they have sanitation teams in the building.
Black Columbia University students are in complete control of all occurrences within Hamilton Hall. You don't believe it, let the monkey cops try to go in there.
So that was the SAS in Hamilton Hall. Now let's take a look inside the SDS at mathematics.
Okay, all right. So this is the whole leadership, right? And he's dead. Joe Tashiro. He's dead. This is JJ. JJ became a major important figure in Weathermen.
So many of these students went on to form Weather
And he wrote
Underground
the original weather paper
after the
that-
collapse
that
of the
became
protest movement and the end of
founding
the
document of
occupation.
Weathermen. He was expelled from Weathermen after the bombing that blew up, the bomb that blew up the Weathermen on 11th Street. They blew up themselves. And he died of cancer in Seattle or something. Still underground. He never appeared. Forgotten his name. That's Susan.
This was Horowitz's girlfriend he met on the barricades.
Going to sleep. You'd sit in the meetings and you'd doze off. That was how you got sleep.
Yeah. See you, Peter.
Tom Hayden was with us. Bruce Spector. He was my friend. He actually is a teacher of Just John Sensen.
Up Against the Wall Motherfuckers were an anarchist group from the Lower East Side who come up to join the occupation.
Jerry Long, JJ.
Very long came from National SDS.
I think there are only a couple of committees here
Who's that?
who really need members for specific jobs.
Tom Hurwitz.
So this is Tom Horowitz, who I'm talking to 47 years later.
When we want people for watches, we only get enough people on the watch. No problem. But, you know, when
You know who that is?
No.
That's Paul Auster.
Whoa.
It's just such beauty. We're so beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing that just amazes me.
So the interesting thing here, you can see the young Tom Horowitz is complaining about the difficulty of finding people to do the less glamorous jobs, to do the kind of jobs of cleaning and cooking and maintaining the state of the space where they're protesting. I find this a really interesting contrast with the SAS, who have their physician, they have their canteen stocked, and they have their cleaning supply, they have their cleaning duties. And I think it's really interesting to think about this when we think about how the two occupations ended. Because you see the SAS, with the support of the wider civil rights movement, and with the support of the Harlem community, and potentially with those negotiating tool of those guns that Horowitz says they're so stupid to have, they managed to negotiate with the university administration to achieve their aims and to exit the building without the police. The SDS exit the building in a very different way. And so we're going to take a look at that now.
Catherine,
Yeah.
are you trying to make a connection between violence and misogyny in the film?
Yeah, actually, thanks for bringing that up, Kelsey.
And that's why I was stapled to the chalkboard, you're topless, and you wanted me dancing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to do. So let's just break that down, those three parts. Okay? So I thought I could draw a connection between what was going on inside the SDS building, the kind of misogyny and the treatment of women in there, and the violence that happens by stapling Kelsey to the wall. I also think that, it was actually quite an effort to be topless in this library because although it's legal in New York City to be topless, CUNY were a little afraid that I would traumatize the passing children on the streets of Fifth Avenue. So we fought really hard for it, and I think it's a worthwhile gesture.
Catherine, I'm not sure that the gesture worked entirely.
Do you have a better one, Kelsey?
Actually, if you could run my slideshow, it starts with a glitter slide.
Nice touch for a feminism presentation.
Thank you. So I was originally cast as the dancing girl in this piece because that's basically what all of the women in the film do, dance. Alberta Taberzi is a model who Whitehead hires to play his girlfriend.
Sono pronta quando vuoi.
There's
too much publicity on television about all these against the war in Vietnam.
A legitimate issue, perhaps the most legitimate issue of our day.
And profits would be obtained. When you cut out the profits, you'll cut out war. Tell me when you're ready.
So yes, this is Alberta Taberzi. She was hired by Whitehead to play his girlfriend. And he films her looking sexy at a photo shoot in a peace dress and dancing and distracting him in his apartment as he tries to work. She's the erotic and irrational, a counterpoint to the politics that Whitehead and the male characters are engaged in. And later inside the Columbia occupation, it's the same dichotomy. The men are discussing things and making decisions, and the women are just dancing. Men discussing things. Women dancing. All my dance moves are a mashup of her dance moves. Men discussing things. Women dancing. When we spoke with Tom Hurwitz, he pointed out all of the men who went on to be famous, but the only woman he points out was his girlfriend. In the 60s, the protests weren't just about politics or war, it was about personal liberation. It was sexual and erotic, and women's bodies became the image of that liberation. Now inside Columbia, Hurwitz told us that it was like ecstasy and euphoria. Feeling of a revolution, the belief that these kids could actually break society free. And later, when that didn't happen, and these kids from the SDS went on to form the Weather Underground, they tried to get back to this high, and they did using drugs, sex, and violence. Now, the images of women in this film feel very outdated and misogynistic. Women as the symbols of emotion versus men as the symbols of intellect. And it's easy to label Whitehead a misogynist, a product of his time. But as I investigated his personal life, I was surprised to find out that he had a long list of affairs with some of the most influential female artists of his time. Kathy Acker, sex-positive experimental writer, Nathalie Delon, French film actress, Nico, infamous folk musician, Nikki de Saint-Paul, famous sculpture, sharpshooter, Bianca Jagger, more of an it girl, but we all know who she is, and Penny Slinger, feminist artist most famous for her photorealistic collages. And here's Peter in one of her collages. So he can't be that much of an asshole, right? Oh yeah, and this is our Peter in one of her collages. So Whitehead takes this tactic of sexual liberation and applies it to his structure as well, rather than the traditional buildup of a film to its climactic moment. A structure that can be thought of as masculine, the traditional buildup, the erotic charge building to the money shot in a porno. Whitehead's film is circular, accumulative, a building of energy through a pattern of repetitions and revisions.
This is why the film is so difficult to talk about, because it's not just non-linear in terms of its structure, it's also non-linear in terms of its themes. we might start talking to Whitehead about his use of images and media representation. But before you know it, we're onto the symbolism of the telephone, the assassination of JFK, MLK, police brutality, the collapse of the protest movement.
The weird thing is that although Whitehead applied this structure to his film, he was still thinking of it in terms of the money shot when it came to the effect on the outside world. He wanted people to see the film and then react to it. Bam! Big explosion. Like the film is foreplay and then the audience comes in a collective outburst of action. And because that didn't happen, because the audience saw the film and filed out of the theater and went on their way, Whitehead concluded that he had failed, and he gave up. But a film can inspire action in other ways. It can be part of a chain reaction, part of a web of repetitions and revisions.
Kelsey, can you help me add this to the diagram? So, Peter, when he finished filming The Fall, said that he wanted to pick up a gun and fight. Now that's action, directly to action, bypassing the image. But he didn't. Instead, he goes on to make a series of films in the 1970s that are often very beautiful, imagistic, but lack all connection to the world. So this wasn't an intellectual withdrawal. This was a withdrawal because his body was too much involved. And this is why he needs these women. You see, Peter, in that image by Penny Slinger, he's actually become the image. And with Nikki de Saint-Phal, he goes on to be the cinematographer for her notorious film, Daddy. So Peter, he's no longer in the center here. This is where Nikki is or where Penny is. Peter, he's way over here, out in the realm of the image.
And what's more problematic than this, these images is this retreat. Anybody here born before 1950 or part of the protest movement in the 60s? I didn't think so. But I'd just really like to ask them, what happened? Why did you give up? Did you sell out for your 401ks and your tenure? You created the liberal dream and then you privatized it at your university, so now our generation can't be a part of it anymore. In 1968, the cost of tuition at Columbia University was $2,500. This year, it's over $60,000, and that is adjusted for inflation. Under their watch, university protest has become a privilege. It's like they climbed a ladder and pulled it up behind them. They drew attention to these problems and then lost interest in them, so they got swept under the rug and became harder for our generation to deal with today. I think maybe we should look to the 60s as the ultimate betrayal, not to look back in nostalgia, but as a warning. It's not an inspiration for student activists today. We should heed what happened in the 60s.
And as a final caveat to that, so when we think about the actions that we've talked about at Columbia, in Greece, when we think about the difference between the SDS and the SAS, all of these actions were incubated in the halls of the university, all of them converting image to action. But their efficacy depends not only on the ability to convert image to action, but the connection with the wider community that allows for action to sustain into the world. So, as a final question to leave all of you with tonight, and if you have any thoughts or suggestions, feel free to come up and write them on the board. How do we create those conditions in university that not only make the space for image to become action, but for action to sustain out into the world? Thank you very much.
Thank
for your time.
Amir, will you lead a discussion? Amir, will there be a discussion?
I don't think so, but maybe with Peter.
With Peter, when he comes back?
With the chicken, I mean. with Hannah, the actress. Cute. It's a good piece. הייתי קצת נגמר בסוף.